Kevin, I imagine you want to give yourself a better introduction than the ribbing I just gave you. So please, in your own words.
So hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Washington. I am the Director of Product Management for Experimentation for Best Buy Enterprise. Primarily, I focus in e-commerce, starting to get into the ad space, specifically more retail media network. But yeah, it's a whole lot of fun. Think A/B testing, multivariate testing. Hey, this AI thing versus this other AI thing, which one's better? I get to do all that fun stuff right now, so it's pretty good.
Yeah, awesome. Now, I think great thing is we have a few folks in the crowd that are experts in experimentation, measurement, test and learn. I'm certain that Doug and Annie can go deep with you on all of these topics. But for the folks in the crowd that are not in the day-to-day nuances and minutia of the digital ecosystem, can you describe just in your own words what we mean by a test and learn plan, what that actually entails in a digital environment?
100%. So when we say test and learn in general, I have an idea. I have a hypothesis. By hypothesis, I mean I have if we do this, then I expect this to occur for this audience of people. Sweet. How do we go and determine whether or not that actually did what we believed it was going to do? So the best way to do that is through a randomized control test, which you say, hey, I want two groups of people who are going to have the same experience, and I'm going to make one of them have a different experience, but all other things be equal or as equal as possible in a random way. And so you go and you run that test for a period of time, and you get to, I go from correlation. And when I say correlation, I mean, hey, this happened and then that happened. I'm going to assume that these must be related, to trying to get to a causal relationship where you can prove that this happened and then that happened. And I have this percentage of certainty that that is a true statement. And then so you get into things like, is it a big enough change? That's the effect size. Is it, I'm not going to try and explain statistical power. is it a thing that is whatever you're testing, is it actually what you're changing? I see that's one of the biggest. You're probably going to ask me a question about that later, but one of the biggest things I always see is when people first get into A/B testing, they say, "Hey, I want incremental to move. I want purchase conversion to increase. That's what I'm testing." Period. Sweet. Well, you made a change on the homepage, and you changed the color of a couple of buttons, and none of those buttons were add to cart. And the job of the homepage is just to move people further into the funnel so that they can, eventually purchase something. That's awesome. But your test might be successful in making the homepage do its job better, but because it didn't directly have a causal relationship with purchase conversion, you're going to say it failed. And so there's this idea of overall evaluation criteria and things like that that's really important in the space.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so let's start talking about customer journey a little bit as it relates to the testing side. So whether we're talking about a more focused site that's D2C like Coterie on day one, or a very large, massive, sprawling site like Wayfair, like we just heard from, are there key phases in a customer's journey that you care about more when you're evaluating when to implement test and learn? And are there certain steps in that journey where influencing it through experimentation will have an outsized impact?
I would say when you're thinking about it, it's anywhere that some people will have, hey, these are my key moments, right? When I think about the product details page, this is where most people are going to land if they're coming in from Google. This is where most people are going to end up before they purchase something. It's where a lot of the decisions are being made. It's a great video, Doug. But what you're trying to figure out. Anybody watching these videos out of order is going to be so confused. But at the end of the day, it's a question of what moments do you care about? Test those, right? When the customer's first landing, where are they landing? What's their first engagement with your brand? And you want to, show up. You want to pop out. Those are the moments that you want to try and test. Where am I going to get the most eyeballs? Because you're going to get the It's easier to get to statistical significance, to get to that causal relationship that we talked about, when you have more customers and you're making a big enough change that customers are going to be influenced by. So go to the moments that you already know. You don't have to do anything different. It's okay, well, what do I care about? I really want to drive more traffic to this page. I really want to drive more value and more value add activities on this page. Cool, test those things. Some people try and get too creative with it. I'm going to make a whole new page and I'm going to have this experience be on the back of this other experience that we've never had before. And I'm going to kind of create, like, look at apples to oranges. It's hard to do that, right? Just try changing things that are part of the moments that you already care about.
Yeah, and so kind of building on that a bit. So when you do have this idea, right, you have a hypothesis, something that you want to go change, whether it's a big splashy thing, which sounds like you're not recommending to insert a truly like huge piece into of overhaul into your journey. Customers are often unpredictable though, right? So like you might with the best of intentions say, we're going to add this pop-up banner, or maybe we already have a pop-up banner. We're going to change the button from blue to green, like whatever it may be. And you think it's going to improve the progression through the funnel to the next step. And in fact, something totally different happens and your hypothesis is disproven or goes off the rails. How do you dig into what actually happened? How do you parse out the why to try to better understand? Was it something in your test design? Was it actually, no, actually, this is what the customer's telling me. I don't like this, or I do like this, and you're just surprised by that. Talk to me how you dig in.
100%. I think it's one of the biggest parts of test and learn is the learn part of it. Just because, and I have a bone to pick with like the Optimizely's and the Epos of the world when they say, hey, it's a win or it's a loss. Technically, you just disprove the null hypothesis, but not, I mean, it is what it is. It depends on what your metric is that you're looking for. Just because your primary metric came back as, hey, this actually didn't move the direction that we expected, that doesn't mean you didn't learn anything. I have this high horse to get on when it comes to testing in general. I think that as enterprises, we are far too focused on, I already have this thing that I want to build, this thing that I want to do. All I want to know is how much money is it making me? So it's an incrementality device. That's not really the best way to be using experimentation. It's to say, hey, I have this big idea and I want to see if it's going to work in market. And I want to see, will customers react the way that I expect them to? And so this gets a little bit into the product management practice and approach. But when you have, this is my hypothesis, you have assumptions about that hypothesis that must be true in order for it to actually drive the revenue or the growth or anything else that you believe it's going to move the metric that direction. So the best way, in my opinion, to use experimentation is to say, how do I validate these assumptions? Which one is my leap of faith assumption, is what Eric Ries would call it, right? So if I say this is the one, I'm going to run a test that's going to prove that customers do react this way when this happens. Cool. And it could be as simple as you want the test to be. But now you've avoided building the whole thing, convincing leadership, doing all the rest of this stuff, and spending 3 months of dev effort to get the thing out the door. Now it has to work. If it doesn't work, we're all in trouble, right? So now you're going to go search for a win, which in reality, you can get the data. Just Doug could probably tell you, you can make the data say whatever you want it to say. Like, you could torture it, and it will tell you whatever you want it to say. But that's not the right way to think about it. And that's what I see a lot of companies do is, okay, hey, we had this idea. I convinced all my sales leadership that this is the right thing to build. We built it. We tested it. It did not move the metric that we thought it was going to. Okay, go find me a win. And that's when they start looking at all the other metrics. Did any of these metrics move the right direction? They'll find one, create a story around that, and then push it. And okay, well, you hurt purchase conversion, but you did drive engagement. You did drive this. You did drive that. Instead of saying, hey, well, we did drive engagement and we did drive this and we did drive that. So what's happening? Oh, purchase conversion's down because we're looking at the rate. We actually had way more customers entering the funnel, deeper into the funnel, but they were falling off because this is an incomplete funnel now. We needed an additional change to happen down here to capture these customers that we haven't had before. Those are the kinds of conversations to have after a test is done, whether you win or lose. Looking at the overall evaluation criterion, which is what Ronnie Kahavi would call it, that's the right way to think about it.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's an element in there that it's organizational attitude, right? Like, what is your willingness to adopt that sort of philosophy versus chasing what are ultimately like bets to drive the business. From a framework standpoint, can you mitigate any of that? Is there best practices around what separates a good and a bad testing framework that might help ease those conversations along?
100%. I would say if you don't have a practice of experimentation that just exists within your organization, you can look at the way that product managers do PRDs, the product requirements documents. An experiment has a very similar amount of rigor in my opinion that it needs to go through. So like what I've done at Best Buy is we've created a white paper template for experiment. Like you have to say, what is the problem that you're solving? Who are you solving it for? What is your hypothesis? And then we start getting into things like, what is your primary metric? But also it says, what are your secondary metrics? Then it says, what are your guardrail metrics? And just by adding those three boxes, we've seen better experiments be run, because people before were just like, oh, well, I thought I'd just say purchase conversion and then we move on. Now you have to think about all the other things. And so even if your leader's saying, no, this test is just incrementality, we have to do this. Okay, cool. That's the primary. Everybody's happy. What are the other metrics that you believe you're actually going to be affecting by putting this change into production? And what do we have to care about potentially the trade-offs of that being? And this is the classic conversation of, I can add a whole bunch of ads to the homepage of Best Buy and I can make a whole bunch of money for a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can watch my CLV run out the door. But you have to run a test to be able to say, if this goes up, this has a, brain fog. This has an opposite relationship with these other metrics. How do we approach that, right? So I think that's making sure that you have different types of metrics on whatever you're putting together for the template for your experiment. And then number two that I've seen, this gets a little more technical. What is the thing that puts a customer into your experiment? Because it's not always going to be that the customer landed on your site, right? And even if it is, landed where? Because you don't want every single customer muddying up what's happening. Usually it's just a specific thing. I want you, if you hit the PDP of TVs for a specific thing, maybe if you're running like a pricing test or a merchandising test. But if you're running just a test on PDPs in general, I don't want people that just hit search and then hit the product listing page and hit add to cart. Cool. What is the actual event that will trigger a customer landing? And that's one of, I think, the biggest things I've seen across Home Depot, Nordstrom, Best Buy is clarifying what that event is from a technical perspective and making sure everybody's aligned. When this event fires, that's the only way they get into the test. And they're in the test forever. Well, 2 weeks, but that's that. I think that's one of the key learnings I've had over the last year or so that's been wildly successful, is like forcing them to no, tell me the code that is going to trigger the thing. It's been good.
I love that because I think it also helps weed out some of the laziness that can come about when, look, good ideas come from anywhere. Everyone thinks they have the next hot thing. But there's too often a glossing over of those key underlying pieces that are so critical to building up a healthy test. So I love that approach and like forcing people to do their homework before they actually can get something out the door. I am curious though, are there ever times where it's just a go do? Someone's like, let's do this thing, might work, might not work. We're pretty sure it's going to work. And for the sake of speed to market, go do it. Or is that ultimately just a roll of the dice and you are often in conversations steering that back towards you need to test it?
It really depends. A randomized control experiment is not the only way to gain. I would say it like this: let's roll it back for a second. What is the job of experimentation? It's to drive additional confidence in the thing that we're about to go and do, that this is the right thing to do and it is driving the incrementality or whatever it is that I believe it will. There are other ways to build confidence. Like there's a whole hierarchy of evidence that you could talk about and like think about, from just people talking to random, hearing anecdotes, to going and doing actual research in the field with your UX research team, or hearing what's coming back from your marketing team. You got to eliminate bias in the questions and that type of stuff, but it is what it is. And you have multiple layers of other things that you can do to build confidence. So you could be highly confident in a thing and say, I'm just going to put it in production because I know it's going to work and I need to be first to market on this thing. That's awesome. I would say that there's also different types of tests you could do too, though, which I would just run 5% of that traffic, at least to do a canary test before we put it out into the market, because the canary in the coal mine thing, basically it's saying, I'm going to just make sure we don't break the site when we put this in production. We did that with our gift finder for Best Buy. Like, we put the gift finder out for most people to have, but we did run a test at 5%, at 10%, at 20% for about 2 weeks before we put it out there, because I want to see what the AI is going to do. How much money are we actually paying for this AI thing that we've never done before? So I think things like that, like slow rolling and doing that type of testing when you have the traffic splitting capability, I think is very important. But to the heart of your question of, if someone says, no, just go do it, I don't care, this is going to work, it's fine, that's okay too. But there's this idea of that I do sometimes, where I'll do a reverse test where, okay, I'll earmark that that's something that we went and did and it was a big change. I'll come back 30 days later. Now we'll still do the difference analysis and do some other just causal inference stuff and time-based regressions to say, like, okay, is this pre-post, is this hurting something? But afterwards, you can actually take 20% and revert it.
Mm.
And that can be your test to see, well, now you have the new experience. I'm going to revert 20% to the old for another, depending on how many days it is, and see if this is actually driving the revenue that we expected. Now, it's not as clean, but it's something good to do. And usually, after all of the hype has died down, you can convince leadership to make that happen.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm wondering, how are you balancing your short-term wins with your long-term goals, right? Of some of these tests, it sounds like you're describing, can be a little more longitudinal in nature. Even if like the actual test itself is like maybe 3 different phases of deploying and then testing and then doing the rollback, the reverse test. How are you balancing that within a holistic testing plan so you have the right mix of things that are happening over 2-3 week spans versus ones that maybe take 3-4 months to prove out and vet?
100%. We try and keep pretty much everything to, well, what I always say is I want 2 weekends of traffic, because we're still in a seasonal, it's retail. Um, but a lot of what you're talking about comes down to prioritization. And so, what is the thing what are we trying to accomplish, right? Whatever our goal is. Right now, Best Buy's big thing, we all know this, right? Yeah, we all know this. It's public. So we have a Best Buy marketplace. That's our huge thing, and there's been a lot of noise in the retail media side of our business as well. So if those are the two big things that we're trying to go after, awesome. Let's put those up here. All the tests that we have, if it is related to one of those two things, 100% we need to go do that. Marketplace is going to be a great example of how the hell do you test that, right? You kind of have to just either have it on or have it off. Like, I can't not have traffic going to third party vendors and stuff. That becomes weird. So how do you do some of these longer term tests that aren't going to impact something is a huge conversation. But generally it's just prioritization. Who's trying to drive what? And we actually have all of our tests broken down, like by you could say product team, but it's really by like page. So like the search team has a folder with all the experiments they're running. The PDP team has a folder, and it all runs through my team in a centralized way that we can see where any collisions might be caused. We can see what's running when. We have our calendar, and we can say, hey, well, this needs to happen, where we need to re-architect 2 or 3 of these pages, and that's going to directly impact these things happening over here. So maybe these should pause and then wait for that to be done. And then once that's live, then we can roll in. So it's a little manual today. My dream world is that we have an AI that we can kind of do a whole lot more of that shuffling and giving people additional information or less information without being as manual. But I think that's in the future.
All right, we're going to come back to AI to close this out, but I have one more question for you first around how are you thinking through the nuance of when you have overlapping tests? Because, the e-commerce team is not the only team that is running tests in the overall environment of a brand. So paid media might be doing something upper funnel that's fundamentally changing the traffic that's then coming into your site and influencing the performance of your test. How are you accommodating for that? How are you assessing it organizationally, making sure that teams are working in concert together? And then within the data, how are you parsing it out?
So on the data side, it gets very complicated. But On the broader side, what I like to say, which is kind of true, mostly true, is that it's called the law of big numbers. It's like, as long as they're running a large enough test and I'm running a test with enough traffic for long enough, it should all come out in the wash. It should still be randomized across the groups. It'll probably be fine. It's what I tell most of the leadership. Sorry, guys. But the other side of it, though, is you do want to try and parse out what's happening, where, why, and how. So what I've been trying to push for across the organization is either, hey, give me all of the experimentation that's happening and let that sit in one centralized place. Or let's create a center of excellence, not a community of practice. They're two very different terms. One means you have to do it, one means it's just a group of people who enjoy the same type of thing and nobody has to listen to them if they don't want to. So, a center of excellence for experimentation so that we can all be on the same page transparently with what's happening. And then you take that and you hand it to one of my data scientists and he does all this collision work to say, well, if this is happening and this is happening and we have all these customers that are known in this marketing thing, which is kind of the nice part of it. I have those UTM parameters and I can see what the visitor tokens of the people that came in are, and I can tell you whether or not it was balanced across A and the B. And if it's not balanced, now it's a question of, okay, well, do we have to run it for longer until it becomes balanced? Okay, no, that test is over. So actually now it's just a little bit skewed, but did those customers actually fundamentally act differently than these other customers? And so we've got a few different like causal pi libraries and whatnot that my team spends a whole bunch of time just having actively running just in case something comes up. But we only do that for the very, very visible experiments. Like if we run in ballpark 300 a year, might be 50 of them that we really want to make sure that like there is no overlap with some of these other things, that it's as clean as it possibly can be. So, but you can't stop the CRM team from running their ads. They should be running ads. They should be running 52 of those a year if they can, but running tests. But yeah, it just kind of comes down to managing it carefully, and today very manually. I think we're getting to the point where we can start to automate some of that causal relationship, at least within the e-commerce space, and then within the what we know about what's happening within marketing. Now that we can kind of pull that data into our environment, but yeah, it's something to be extremely aware of. I usually have about 5 questions that I ask before I say whether or not something's going to conflict with one another. The main one of those 5 is, if they both win, and you scale them both? If the answer is yes, you might want them to collide and then specifically look at those people that were in both test groups and then see what happens with that. Did they have a synergistic effect, or was it the opposite? Right. So that's something I think people miss. No, I need a clean test. I need just this one thing. I need to see what the incrementality is. I want anything else to affect it. Okay, but that's not realistic. And this other team is going to also run this test, and then we'll put this thing into production if it wins. So let's just run them both at the same time and see what happens. And you can do that by splitting it out and putting them in, like, here's A, B, C, D, where these 2 are here, this one's here, and you just create different panels for each of them. Or you just let them both randomly run, and we have millions and millions of people worth of traffic. So it will probably be fine. It'll probably come out in the wash. See, full circle. I'm
All
not
right.
lying.
So my head's starting to hurt now.
Yeah,
So let's this all
sorry.
sounds very complicated. So let's end on how we can potentially start simplifying through AI and other tools that help mediate a lot of these interactions and help us make sense of it all. I'm curious though, are you finding practical use cases for AI today within your testing plans and in your testing environments? What do they kind of look like? How are you thinking about leveraging those, using those, and staying on top of the forefront of those evolutions over time?
Yeah, I'm stoked on this topic. I will say I will stay out of the experimentation and using AI to actually do some of the analysis and the work, because I can't afford to have a black box. You've got a white box, you got a black box. What I try and do is stay in this like light gray box right here. It gets a little darker sometimes, but the explainability is so important in experimentation. Um, I can't use AI for that. What I can use AI for, and I'm extremely excited about, I'm like all in on agents are cool. Agentic AI is dope, but like, large language models, small language models are the new fun thing that I'm stoked about, because how can I feed a language model only the things that I want it to care about, that I want it to pull from, the way that I care as Kevin about experimentation in retail, and just give it a bunch of blog posts. And hey, maybe I'll use an LLM to write half of them, but just throw them all in there. And then when somebody has a question about experimentation, they can ask that instead of asking me. So it doesn't have to go search the great wide web with all the nonsense that's out there. No. Just what did Kevin say we're supposed to do in this
You're building
situation?
a little mini robot, Kevin.
Brother, that's all I want. That's all I want. That's all. That's it. Just.
And is there a subscription service? Can I have little mini
Hey,
Kevin
hey,
on my
hey,
phone?
hey, man.
I want to take you with me.
Hey, $10 a month, I got you, bro. Whatever you need. But I think that's one thing I'm really excited about. So the SLM piece is there, but on the other side of it, I think that what we can do right this second is take all of the data that we have on every experiment that we've run, because it's all in one place, and take all of the test plans that have been put together with the results and everything else, and have all of that be read, which is it's basic NLP, but let's call it AI because it is what it is. But have an AI look at that, and then the next time somebody creates a plan, say, hey, this has actually been run before. Here's some links to similar experiments. Please take a look at those. Or as you're writing it, help you by saying, hey, this metric, if this is your activation event, the amount of traffic that you would get over a 2-week period for this event historically is this. And based on that traffic, you may need to run for X amount longer, or just help you actually write the test plan itself, because it's a lot of questions. But if you can get the problem and the hypothesis written, then it can kind of help to create everything else that you're looking for. That, I think, is the fun part. I think the operations of experimentation is going to be far more impacted in the short term by AI than anything that you're going to see in the black box, like, hey, we can run experiments now. Well, the other thing that I think would be fun is, which I don't know if it's a thing yet. I don't know how many people are doing this, but you can generate all of these different approaches. I think like Movable Ink and some other folks will tell you that, like, I know Optimizely will, that, hey, I can make 1,000 different variations of the content that you have based on the library of content that you're providing. Some will say it can create it. I think it's still a little screwy with that. But what I think would be interesting is, how do you feed that into a multi-arm bandit, and that's outside, it sits outside of the personalization model, that can sit there and learn, and then how do you connect that and the information that you receive back from the customer feedback to the actual personalization model, and then you help to teach that with the information that you have, that you're creating over here. Now you could say, why wouldn't you just make that your personalization model? I think keeping them separate is more valuable, just because then you know what's happening with the personalization. You have no idea what's happening with the black box stuff. So it's the transparency piece. So that's, yeah. Anyway, I'm getting way off topic.
No, this is super fascinating. And actually, going right before the piece on the multi-arm bandit, when you were talking about using a small language model to complement your hypothesis. So if I understand you right, like really the recommendation there is like having something that when you go back to that brief where it's, here's what I actually want to learn, but then all of that complementing detail underneath, that's a bit of a headache to go out and scrounge through and like build the case to. This could help supplement that and support it.
100%. I think that, and then telling you what other experiments have been done. I see so many people that have run experiments or want to run experiments that have already been done. We already learned this. And now, hey, doing it twice is fine if you have a good reason, but at least allowing people to have the visibility and the searchability without having to go and do the work themselves, because people just don't want to do it. People are, I'm not going to say they're lazy, but So.
Okay. All right, I think we're all looking forward to the release of iKevin that sits on our shoulder.
100%.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for the deep insights into experimentation. What questions do we have from the crowd?
Got one. Nice.
Hey, Kevin.
What up?
So loud. Okay. Kind of just follow up on what you just said, right? About like, doing the test again. We know that tests kind of vary based on seasonality and things change. So how often do you actually retest? Are there certain things you look for that like, hey, this could work outside of this time frame, as opposed to just letting it run forever and then like all of a sudden seeing like a drop in
100%.
performance?
I think that's a perfect question. Holiday events, things like that. There are some things that maybe you only want to have on your site during those periods. So test them during those periods. If you want to do something for Black Friday, test it on whatever your big seasonal thing is. July 4th is big. Cool. Let's test it then so that we can start to gear up for whether or not we think we'll drive revenue. I think something that we have, I don't think we do it anymore, so I could probably talk about it. The banner that you see at the top when you're on Best Buy, where it says like what all the categories are, if you make that responsive so that whatever you looked at last pops up at the end, doesn't really drive anything incrementally during the year. So we'd rather use that space for other stuff like showing new features, gift finder, stuff like that. But during holiday, it drives crazy amount of incremental revenue because people are bouncing all around the site and they're like, ah, shit, where was I? And then they come back and it's like, ah, there it is. And then they end up purchasing. And so it's small things like that where I think it is extremely valuable to run tests that are specific to a holiday or a season. If your business is, and I'll put it like this, if your business is significantly changing during periods, do some tests during those periods because it's going to be your best time, probably your most traffic, probably your best customer. Test some things with them specifically if that's where you if that's what you're being impacted by. No one wants to do that though. I'll tell you right now. It's extremely hard to convince business partners that that's something you should do, but it is awesome. I've seen a ton of wins doing specifically that.
Going.
Yes.
Oh, here we
Thank
go,
you.
Doug.
Do a dance.
You and I were talking about this at dinner, but I'll ask it and you can see if you want to answer in public. So what's next for Kevin Washington beyond Best Buy, beyond testing?
And I don't know. I think AI is dope. I think that there's a ton of stuff going on right now. I think a lot of people should be spending a ton of time. If you have an idea, figure out how to code it. Just go talk to the AI and have it answer the question. If you've never used Python before, now is the time. I'm probably going to have a class on, vibe coding in Python. Has everybody heard about vibe coding? No, it's huge. They talked about it at Y Combinator. Beautiful. It just means you have no idea what you're doing. You get the code from the AI, you run it. If it has an error, you put it back in the AI, have it fix it, you put it back. And so doing that with things like Python, I think is going to open up the world to a ton of people. And so that's something that I'm super passionate about right now. And I'm spending a whole bunch of time. Thanks, Doug.
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.